So welcome everybody to the Philosophical Yogi. Today I have with me the wonderful David James, the unmonk, and I will be putting all of his links underneath this video. David he's going to get a chance to speak in a second. I'm just going to give you a little bit of background as to how I met David. I met David on the audio app Clubhouse, along with many people who will be watching this video. If you go into a room or into the presence of David, it's a time for you to just sit back and let your intuition digest what he's saying to you, to kind of just let those silky tones of the universe just kind of linger in the air and do their work. He never qualifies himself when asked questions, which was one of my key drawers to his work, was that he wasn't peddling anything. But if you listened intently enough, you could tell that he really knew what he was expressing, and that it was coming from some other form of intelligence rather than just something that was ego-based and wanting to impress. So I hope you all enjoy this conversation. And David, welcome. It's always lovely to be hanging out with you.
Thank you, Ziba. It's a real pleasure to be with you. Thank you.
My first question
is
I'd like you to just kind of lay out the background to how you became the man you are today. So what is the journey that you went on in the simplest terms, in the time that we have, that formulated your perception of the world as it is today?
Well, it's a bit of both, really. I mean, frankly, I know it might sound a little cliche, but I think I was born into severe trauma, if you will. I was born into a very fundamentalist Christian family, and with a very acrimonious divorce based on religious doctrine, to be quite honest. And so at that age, where you're 1 or 2, you tend to get isolated very fast, because everything told to you is based on dogma, or what I sometimes term as a form of fascism. But apparently I was not normal, Ziba. Around 4 or 5, I basically, rebelled, and I said, I'm not listening to sense. And so that got me into trouble for the next 10 years of my life, because I was actually having what I would call, what some people would call non-local experiences. I couldn't make sense of it, to be very frank with you. And so I began to question my own sanity very, very early on, when I was 6 or 7. But around 8 or 9, I was having very profound dialogues with people several decades senior to me. I was discussing the classics when I was 8 or 9, and something was not wrong. So either they said he was a genius or he's completely crazy. But things got worse, because I couldn't find myself in the world, and it got pretty bad. So around 15 or 16, I think I was a mess, really, because I couldn't fit myself. And it just so happened I was in a halfway home, and one of Swami Satyananda's closest disciple of the Bihar School of Yoga, I mean, she was very, very senior. She was in his inner circle, and she was one of the foremost neuropsychiatrists in the world at that time. And she gave up her practice to become a full-time sannyasi. And as she was weaning herself away from the world, she was having a partial practice. And Swami Satyananda says, go to this place and see whether you do whatever you like. And she met me. And she told everybody else, please, hands off, come with me. And she introduced me to Swami Satyananda. I must have been about 17, I think. I don't exactly remember. And there's something completely flipped. And everything made sense from a very outwardly perspective. In other words, what so far didn't make sense made complete sense, but no one else could make it out. I could just see uh, the sense in the chaos. So that's how it started. And he didn't initiate me in the usual way. He just said, go about and do whatever you like and you'll just get it. And that's how I started and began a journey of, today I prefer to call it just a discovery.
Yeah.
Rather than just trying to be a student of anything else. So he put me into situations, extreme situations, which I feel many people would not have handled, but it was just massive exposure. And my brain was a sponge, so I just picked it up.
Mm.
And gradually, of course, being a self-learner, um, I learned something and then I also had to learn how to unlearn, which was actually far more difficult for me. But it came in a very um, it just came. I had to do that. So here I am. So whatever I say or do is I speak from my own experience. I want to tell your viewers. So anything that I say is based on what little I know or don't know. And I'm happy to answer questions from anybody who really wants to explore any topic that you want to uncover. So thanks for that.
Wow. So your existential crisis, as it were, became existential in tapped into intelligence. And it's really interesting that you weren't prescribed anything kind of remotely dogmatic, as you put it, by this disciple of Swami Satyananda, that it was very much this, you were going to be taken on this unique journey where you were going to have all of those blueprints challenged, and your nervous system and your kind of deeper intelligence was up to the challenge. Some would say that that was almost a rarefied seed from the beginning, and it's really a lot for us to unpack when we often make comparisons for those of us who are on this journey of discovery.
Sure.
And,
Sure.
we don't like to admit that, why has that person found a guru? And why was that person given all these graces? But I think that it's important that we do express things in the way that we were, and we don't try to kind of smooth it over for other people's egos. And I think that that is part of the greater intellect of how this works. And
Yeah.
so I want to thank you for your honesty. It's a fascinating beginning, and what an interesting kind of group to be brought in by. And clearly, well, for me, I feel that she was there because
Sure.
she
Sure.
was told to get there and go and get you. So,
Yeah. I consider my spiritual midwife, if you will. But
yeah,
sure.
yeah, yeah. So what would you say because we call the philosophical yogi very much about autonomy. So this isn't about my opinion. This is about people listening and then digesting what you say and making their own value judgment on that. So with
Sure.
that in mind, what would you say if you could box or kind of list your philosophy that you currently view the world by? How would you describe that? It could be a sentence or two.
Yeah. To be very honest, Ziba, I hope I don't have a philosophy,
Yeah.
maybe a practice at best. You know, uh, you know, as you know, I was born and brought up in the third world. And, if you go outside your window, you'll probably see abstract poverty on the streets. Not just in India, but anywhere. You'll see homeless people in London, New York, or Philadelphia, or just name it. And I might have been philosophical once,
Yeah.
but can you imagine? I mean, by the time I was 20 or 22, Many people found me incredibly accomplished because I knew all the philosophies backwards, including the various texts in Hinduism and Buddhism and multiple languages. But there was something missing. Now, if I had to go out and meet one of these people who were starving on the streets, homeless, or for that matter, with great health crisis, and say, I think you should read or practice yoga, or you should read this book, or the Bible for that matter, or anything else, I might be lynched because, you know, it, it turned out, frankly, for me, I began to realize that philosophy can be a great indulgence and quite a luxury for many people. And really, what I'm involved in is really, and this is a problem that I see and I'm possibly pushing back against, if you don't mind, is that there are incredible philosophers, especially out in India. In India, there are two Indians across a table and a cup of tea, you have philosophy. And
Sure.
you see, there are two parts of this. And you see, and this might be quite seminal and might lead you into other questions as well. It's just like the guy who's starving on the street. He's not interested of his place in the universe or the great philosophical questions.
Yeah.
He is really interested in what reality means for me. And how do I have a sense of identity on this planet in terms of my environment, where I can't get food? Or if a middle class person says, my God, I've got to pay the mortgage next month. The gas bill has gone up. It's not raining, so how do I plant my crops? So when do I harvest? You see, there is something different from understanding what reality means for us, and what our engagement with phenomena is, and all the various practices of philosophy. So I'm more interested in how an individual relates himself to the environment and how he arrives at insight. That's it. That's a practice which I'm quite involved in, and I do help to talk to people and understanding this and moving them away from beliefs into direct experience. I think that's, if I could sum that up, that would be what I would say, my practice.
And when you're engaging with people, I think it's really interesting that you brought this up. Having ran yoga studios myself and known my own inadequacies in this department, the questions that people have and what they actually want are normally, one is like a pre-recorded, as you're saying, it's something that's pre-recorded, and hence it's never really going to be satisfied. And then there is this deep yearning that is happening at the same time. How would you say you bridge that gap? Because coming from my own experience of yoga, and I know that you're more or you are very, very knowledgeable also of the, and when I say that I mean experientially, of the Hermetic Principles. So how are you bridging that gap? So let's just say comparatively, they come to me, some novice yoga teacher, and they come to you, and whilst I may see something, there's no way that I can make that connection for them necessarily, or it may take years and years and years.
Sure. One of the things I like to distinguish is yoga from yogic exercises.
Yeah.
And yogic exercises is excellent. You can practice Pilates if you like, or swimming, and they're both excellent to actually rejuvenate the body. But yoga is a bit much more subtle and much more deeper than that. In fact, it goes into depth psychology. And if you, one of the things that I'm very much against, and I can speak with some authority because I was with one of the preeminent in schools of yoga for about a couple of decades, is what I'm really interested in or getting away from are what they would call preachers who would say this is what reality is or ought to be. Now, this is conjecture or consensus,
Mm.
or what I would call a replay of a replay of a replay cascading down centuries.
Mm.
I'm more interested in the first-hand experience of the person and what reality means to them, and making sure they understand what consciousness is from their perspective.
Yeah.
That's the big difference. So I really get into depth psychology and uncovering their internal archetypes and how they would actually interface with the world outside, what I call phenomenon, because there's a phenomena outside. And what nobody talks about, especially in India and many parts of the preaching world, is how humans cognize. What is our cognitive apparatus? I mean, we have an interaction, uh, something happens outside, and then our senses become alert. Our ears, sight, our touch all get that. These are sensory perceptions. Sensory, I beg your pardon. And then we gather all these inputs or signals together, and then we form our perceptions. If both of us see the same phenomena, you're going to have a different perception than I do. And there's a reason for that. What this reason is something that I always love to uncover with an individual, because then it exfoliates why they're having that direct experience. But more important than that, it focuses on that they are having a direct experience, and that is the only experience which is their reality. Everything else is somebody else's experience or somebody else's conjecture, which has got nothing to do with me.
And you see this so often in this kind of new, and it is still very much very new, this kind of baby Western version of spirituality, and we're all kind of copying each other in language and even in the way that we're carrying ourselves. So it's not that it's just mimicry of the language, it's mimicry in the way you carry body, the way that certain information is presented. What I guess I also what I'd like to ask around what you're saying is, how do, once you have begun to kind of really get into the nuts and bolts about how they have perceived the world and where
Mm-hmm.
they're coming from,
Mm-hmm.
how long would you say it takes, or what kind of commitment does someone need to really beginning to examine that for themselves? So you've drawn something out of them, they have observed something in you, and now some kind of penny is starting to drop. How do we ensure that the penny continues to drop?
I think that's a very great question, and a very practical question, to be quite honest. And I must confess that though I did, sort of first have my first foray into very deep psychic states through yoga and through several of my Indian masters, I did spend a lot of time in Japan and China, where I met some very unusual type of people, where I encountered Zen in its most extreme form. And I think the great Zen masters of today are the stand-up comics. And the reason why I say this is because the use of language alters their conceptual hardwiring. It unravels it. And this is extremely important. So you can have a person who gets insight in 1 second, or it can be drawn out over a period of time, depending on the trauma. Because one of the problems of being drawn out is they actually do have a situation which is prolonged. An example would be an extreme health situation, or it could be a loss of a job where they need to actually get back on the tracks. And we need to actually help them rewire their braining, how to change their perspective and how to react to phenomena so that their internal archetypes may change, and therefore they really become empowered. So it can take even a second, or might take, with me, in an average, it might take about 6 weeks, and then they become friends for life. It's like that, yeah. And One of the things, and somebody asked me this a long time back, is if people ask me why I keep saying this, and it sounds quite harsh, but I always say is the world could do with one less guru. And the reason why I say that is because I think the universe would really like to see all of us independent rather than dependent on one person. Because when we become dependent, we're really, sacrificing our authority and cognizance. And really, we'll never get our own insight or our own authority back. I think this is very important. But so if I can revert or circle back to your original question, is the practice really is to just simply have a conversation like what you and I are having, for example, and say, can we arrive at insight? And I would never foist an insight onto another person, even though I might know the answer. It must, what I would call, emerge from the person's own cognitive apparatus so that he can understand what the situation is. And frankly, that's 90% of the problem. And that's how he understands what reality means for him. I hope that makes sense to anybody.
I think it will. And as you're talking, I'm getting that it's like when you're doing breathing practices and you're exercising your diaphragm for the first time and you get that kind of itchy, tingly feeling. You don't really that disconnect. And as you're talking, I'm imagining the cognition as that itchy kind of, hang on a minute, and it is, as you say, a case of how often can I make that touch point? How often those electrodes happen until it's no longer disassociated from me? It is the...
Yeah, you're referring to something called bodily awareness, which will raise your internal consciousness. And it's fantastic, an analogy that you give. I mean, if I could sum that up, I'm trying to get people away from beliefs to direct experience. And I think the world needs less beliefs and more experience. That's it. That's David.
I do have another question, but I want to ask on the back of what you've just said before I ask the next question. With that in mind, do you feel that the education system, I'm sorry, it just popped into my head.
No, please. I mean, you just go ahead.
The direct opposition of that, particularly when you get to further education. So say, for example, universities, where science is already explained and certain experiments have already taken place and I understand that a foundation is required, but do you feel that universities are making a positive impact on intellectual autonomy, or where do you sit there?
I'm beginning to think that I think some people are beginning to understand there's a huge gap in education. And I think some people are making a difference. And I can think of a few. University of Uppsala has a very different way of research. And of course, most of the American universities as well. But what I'm concerned about is that we have become parrots. And we completely dissuade critical thinking or even irreverent thinking. We'd like to see more heresies in the classroom because if we don't have heresies, we're really not going to push the envelope. And what you refer to is that, settled science. In my opinion, there's no such thing as settled science. I mean, what I would call settled science is just a convenient fiction for us to actually get a grasp of what the universe, how it works. That's it. Yeah, so I know you're laughing because when Newton started, when he started with the 3 laws of gravity, and he says, we have these objects and they've got some mysterious force which draws them together. I mean, the French laughed at him for 50, 60 years. And then there was Einstein. He says, no. We've got a different theory of gravity. And he brought up his. Now, we humans are very, very quick to accept a guru's words without questioning it. I was different. I mean, I was quite irreverent. And I had to find things out for myself. But what we do is we are looking all the time of trying to make sense of the world outside. This is what I would call part of our cognitive apparatus. So if Newton's theory works for us then, that's fine. Before Copernicus came around and the world was flat, everybody accepted. That was their convenient fiction. Then somebody came around and said, it's actually round. They says, no, we dare not do that. Otherwise, we'll fall off the earth. Please don't leave. And then we understood what gravity was, and then Galileo came. So we keep developing something, what we call is a type of reality, or what somebody called it a fantastic description of what I call a controlled lie. To just accept reality with what works for us. And what works for us, if it comes from someone quite influential, it becomes consensus reality, not necessarily the truth. Yeah. One person will fly off and say, no, I'm going to challenge what consensus reality is, and we'll come up with some other theory. That's how we keep pushing the envelope. So I think critical thinking is something that I would really need to start from kindergarten, really.
Yeah, I agree. Having a young child of my own, having the dialogue,
okay,
or the equipment to have the dialogue would be great.
Sure.
We try and keep their minds open, but they are already being told how things are.
Yeah.
So it's quite interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. Would you say, so I want to go a little bit, little tiny bit more meta now then. So would you say that existence itself is experiential? Are we always going to find what we're looking for? Is it inevitable that if we look for long enough, there it is? And also, is existence itself the experience?
There are two parts of this, in my opinion. One stems from belief. If we've got a very strong belief, in other words, I'm not going to leave my belief, then everything is a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah.
I think I'm stating the obvious. For example, if you strongly believe in Santa Claus, or the child believes in Santa Claus, and she hears something in the chimney, she's going to swear that Santa came down and drank the milk and the cookies, and she's going to live with it for some time till that belief is shattered. So most of us have beliefs, and we are going to cling to beliefs because that's easier than critical thinking. And our minds are very tricky, and we'll create all our circumstances and archetypes, even hallucinations, to confirm that belief. So that's part one. And then there's a second one who says, listen, I think I'm tired of beliefs. My beliefs are not, holding fast in this new world. I can't make sense. I need to find out what's going on. That's where I think the dark night of the soul starts creeping in, because nothing begins to make sense. In all your beliefs, which we had for lifetime, maybe even lifetimes, begins to look very shaky. And that's when the involution process starts. And then we want to say ask ourselves, is this belief that I have based on my own personal experience, or is it based on hearsay? And then we begin to uncover or really interact with the world in a far more dynamic way and understand our interaction with phenomena and how our cognitive processes work and how we are creating our archetypes to relate with the world. So then we are really paying very close attention to our inner theater. And that process of attention itself is direct experience, or what we call an existential reaction to the world. And that makes sense. Then everything else says, no, I don't accept that because it's not in my experience. There is one qualification I must do. It's true our direct experience, our first-hand experience is all that matters. But then even a person who hallucinates says, no, I just had an experience, and that's real, correct?
Yeah.
You see, The key is coherence. If the outer world sees you behaving coherently with what we consider consensus reality, then your reactions with the outside world is plausible because you relate it to that. And you, as your inner theater, have determined whatever I've interacted with, it is plausible as well, but independent plausibility, my sight, my ears, somebody told me and it's true, etc. And I also behave coherently with the world by my own direct experience, then that's real. But a person who hallucinates is not behaving coherently with the world. He can't make coherence.
Yeah.
So we have to distinguish between extreme, what we call, some people say solipsism, and actual direct experience, which is within our own mind. And this distinction must be made. And frankly, a lot of people have hallucinations or delusions, if you will, when they meet me. And we have to strip that away to get them to understand what coherence is and how they relate it with the other world. So that is a process, yeah.
Yeah. I'm really glad you said that because I feel that, especially in what you said, the discovery, some would say the spiritual journey, there's a lot of disassociation that appears to happen with people where
Sure.
they've reached this particular state, but they're not connecting with the world around them in a true sense. So I'm really glad that you've used this word coherence, because that makes a lot of connective sense to me, and it feels better than the word just aligned, because again, aligned feels a little bit abstract, whereas
Sure.
being coherent and that kind of exchange taking place between matter
Sure.
and the mind, that makes a lot of sense. So I really appreciate that. How do you feel in this viewpoint that you're operating under? Do you measure outcomes in that sense then, or is the world's response to you not empirically measured? It just is interpreted intelligently, and that feedback mechanism is what does the communication.
I'm so glad that you use those words. I don't measure.
Yeah.
Because there's nothing to measure.
Mm.
It's basically, I hope that my interaction with the world gives me insight.
Mm.
It's insight for that particular transaction or the phenomena or that event. That's it. And insight can't be measured. But insight are stepping stones to transcendence. It's not one big leap. You don't cross the universe in one step. It's because I'm not experiencing the entire universe. I'm only experiencing what I have in front of me at this moment and here now. That's it. Just like you are looking at me and hearing me and trying to make sense of what I'm saying, you're doing exactly with your own environment every second, every moment of the day. You're wondering whether you should go out and plant carrots or peas or pluck fruit at what time of the day. So your apparatus is working and you're saying, I need insight, or rather, I need intelligence. It's great to start with intelligence. That's enough. In my opinion, if somebody understands the way the cognitive apparatus works, you simply solve the whole idea of consciousness, because that's the only time you can experience consciousness in the here and in the now. How you experience it is the way you experience or get a traction of consciousness. That's it. That's why I tell people consciousness is easy. It's science, which is hard.
I'm going to make it hard again because
Okay.
I'm making it easy. So,
Okay.
with consciousness, then it's another word that is used quite frequently. And are we all tapping into the universal consciousness for ideas and intelligence? Are we all in this great web, this great entanglement with consciousness?
Mm-hmm.
First, so this question has two parts.
Right?
Do you agree that there is one universal intelligence, the super consciousness that we're all tapping into? And the second part of that question is, where do we reside within that?
I'm going to give you my interpretation. And the reason why I say my interpretation, because if you go out, you'll find 100 million of this. Yeah. And I'll just speak on David's behalf. Yeah. The first part is there a universal consciousness? Definitely. I would say it's infinite. But the second part is a bit tricky. Because it's infinite and we are finite, what are we tapping into? And more importantly, how much? I'm one of the few people who say the universe is not really showing you everything deliberately because you're a product of evolution and your brain can't handle the downloads that the universe has got. So it only actually shows you what you can see based on your own brain. I'm not using cognitive, your own brain capacity. A good example would be, actually, this is a very important topic because the great gurus or the preachers of the world simply don't have this knowledge. They don't talk about it.
Yeah.
And the thing is, we are a product of evolutionary biology. And as a product of evolutionary biology, we have come to this point of learning how to survive and value the environment and what amount of food or energy that we can extract and propagate our genes. That's it. That's our success story. We're not geared to understand consciousness. And it's only now, in the past few thousand years ago, suddenly somebody popped up and said, there's something called consciousness. Why are we consciousness? Why is this emerging? Why am I feeling like this? But consciousness has been around certainly much longer than we have, and we've only been around for about 1.82 million years.
Yeah.
So if consciousness is primary, and infinite, our brains or cognitive apparatus can't handle it. So what we see is what we can extract on it to make sense from a world which is nonsense. That's it. You can't actually see the entire world or the entire consciousness. In fact, I mean, go further and say that's what consciousness shows us. And if that's what they show us, our limitations as such is that we only take what the consciousness is showing us and we strip it, use what we can, and discard the rest. The analogy I like to use is like food. We are battered all the time by signals, by what our eyes and ears and our touch do all the time. We can't handle these signals. So just like food, we put it in our mouth and then we taste it, which is our first sensory input. And then we masticate it. And then we put it down to our stomach, and then the body takes over and only extracts the nutrients that is good for the body. And then excretes the rest. That's exactly like the way we interact with the universe and the signals coming, information signals which are coming to us. Does that example make any sense?
It does. And then I can't help but complicate it. Does that mean that consciousness is also extracting anything from us?
You're referring to a completely different perspective of what the universe intent is. And I think you've touched upon it. That's excellent. It's a good segue.
Okay.
Because I think another way to ask that question is, why are we here?
Yeah. Yeah.
Right?
A much simpler, better way to ask that question. Why are we here?
Yeah, I know you may have heard me say this, and maybe in Clubhouse or Club Deck or whatever you want to call it, is I'm one of the few people who say, consciousness of the universe is pretty dumb.
Mm,
And the reason why it's so dumb, it's because it's unified and it does not have what I would call a subjective experience.
mm,
I mean, it's like the mirror
yeah,
trying to look at itself.
yeah.
So it needs Ziba or David
Mm,
in plurality to actually experience something so that it can get a feedback.
mm,
So if Ziba or David is feeling angry
mm,
or loving, etc., based on its environment, and we are part, to answer your second part of the question, we are held by the universal consciousness, or what people might reverse to as Paramatma. That's a feedback which is happening, going back to consciousness, so it consciousness can expand. Otherwise, it has no way of understanding its own self.
yeah.
So my preference is, while people have a dualistic view, there's consciousness out there, or God, or source, whatever you want to call it, and we are here,
Mm,
that's obviously I don't accept.
yeah.
Then there's another view, which is, says we're all united, we're all one. And that's, you hear that quite often in the wellness or the new age circles or the theories of manifestation and all that stuff.
Mm,
I take a completely different view. And this is not easy to grasp, if you don't mind, because it really needs to have an experience to understand what my analogy is. I prefer to have a holographic view.
right.
And in other words, I'm here and the universe is over there, and that everything in the universe is here and me in the universe as well. I'm oversimplifying, obviously. Yeah. So, which means the universe and you and I are having a tango, and we're giving each other feedback simultaneously at the same time.
Mm,
Now, though I've explained it in language, it does not do justice if you can experience this.
mm,
Because when you can experience this, then you understand your role and why you're here, and frankly, why the universe is trying to manifest, not just in you, but in every life form, or even a non life form, like the pebble that you see on the beach. And it's been around for infinity. We've just been here for 2 million years. I think it's a great hubris to say that we can even understand consciousness. We don't. We are just infinitesimally finite.
yeah. Oh, that was so good, David. I'm taking a breath.
I mean, it's
Yeah,
a rabbit hole you can go down to. It's a very separate topic. And
yeah,
I love to do this when I'm with individuals, because I can see what they're going through.
yeah.
And then I can exfoliate
Mm,
what they are going through and understanding their own consciousness and how they tie into the universal consciousness. You might call it Paramatma. In the West, we might even call it the diamond,
mm,
and how it's actually saying, I want to live my life through Ziba. I want to live my life through David. I
mm.
want to see what he experiences, so that when he pushes the envelope, I am pushing the envelope with him.
Yeah. And I could see how that would benefit once healing had taken place or whatever needed to happen, and how that, to then have that kind of power surge out. I can see how that perspective would help one become more to just be more fearless. Let's just put it in practical terms, and then just operate in the world from a place of more confidence, uh,
Sure.
maybe as well. In that, I I find that sometimes it's my fault because I go
No,
there,
no,
ask
well,
these
yeah.
questions, and then it's almost like, yeah, okay, now you're tripping, so I'm going to bring it back.
Go
Otherwise,
ahead and ask me anything, my dear. Don't worry. Yeah,
so
absolutely.
there. This is, you might find this a little bit of a dull question. To be honest, I find it a little bit of a dull question too. But I know that still people talk about this, so I'm going to ask you, because particularly of your journey and who you've been in contact with. What would you see is the purpose of the guru disciple relationship or teacher disciple student relationship? And do you feel that, yes, some people just get to meet a better teacher? And if you're saying the guru is within, you might just, that might just be a little bit of a cop out in that scenario. What are your thoughts on that?
Even the guru disciple relationship is a cliche.
Yeah.
Again, I'm speaking from my experience. And the reason I can say that is because I was quite an irreverent disciple. I was quite I wouldn't accept anything. Whereas in the Indian tradition, you're supposed to accept everything what the guru says. But I yelled at my master and I said, what's the point if I can't be independent? And he said, absolutely right. So he said, the only way to be independent is to throw you in the deep end of the pool and learn to swim on your own. So he said, there are two types of gurus. One guru is when the disciples make the guru. The guru wants his own karma to be something. Mm. So he sits on an ivory tower and on a throne, and he's dressed up in fantastic robes and great malas, etc. And frankly, everybody looks at him as a guru, which is like, all hail you master, etc., etc. So now you've got disciples who are dependent on him. Then there's another guru who's a complete asshole. He's a terrorist. He destroys you. He's not easy to like. And the only thing he does is to destroy your beliefs and give you a direct experience where you can use that experience as a conceptual tool to engage with the world in real time. And when you can do that, he recognizes, okay, here I've got David or Ziba, who can stand on their own 2 feet regardless of the situation. So he's brought you there. He's the finger pointing to the moon, which as the Zen proverb says, but he's not the moon. So when you can stand on your own 2 feet and independent, then you become the right disciple and he leaves you. I know many disciples who become even bigger than their guru. And these guys don't use terms like guru. They'll just say buddy, friend, soulmate, fellow traveler, etc., etc. And there's a relationship where they recognize that the disciple is coming with tremendous archetypes with him. He's like, he's got internal algorithms which can be self-taught. And he wants to be independent. In fact, there are masters who only look for one such disciple in their entire life, initiate them, and then fantastic things happen. Like Swami Shivananda, for example, which is in my lineage. He just met his guru for 10 minutes. He was initiated, and his guru went back to Banaras and died in 1 week. And then you had Swami Shivananda. So there are many people who've got a certain path which needs to be catapulted, if you will, but independently. So I do believe there is a place for the guru, but not in a dependent relationship. And the second thing is very, very important to realize a good guru is whether he's confirming your beliefs. Because most gurus, or many people, they have the, like most psychics, they can read you with a cold call, your emotional state, etc., and they can feed it back to you like a facsimile. And then you say, oh, he's such a wonderful guy. He confirmed everything I said, yada, yada, the usual stuff, etc. But the real test is, did he confirm your beliefs or did he destroy it? It's the latter guy, which is very, very rare to find. It's quite harsh. I mean, I had many people like that who really shattered everything I knew. I mean, literally shattered everything. So the good thing is I came from a place where I had no beliefs. I had to find out just exactly, okay, I'm done with everything. What next? And so I was very fortunate to meet some people. And I really wish anyone listening to this or viewing your program would meet somebody like this who completely shatters their belief. I do wish they don't meet someone like my master, who was quite harsh, but in a way that would help them become the best version of themselves by their own authority. And that's my take.
Well, that's beautiful. I think my natural next question to that is another practical question then. Do you think that the West is equipped for that kind of relationship? Or is it just the geographical locations that have held on to particular practices? So when you talk about someone shattering your belief system, I know that you're doing incredible work with individuals, but do you think that part of some of the issues that we're having in this kind of infancy of spirituality in the West is that we don't have the infrastructure for that kind of relationship, or even the kind of fertile soil? Or do you think we do? We're just demonstrating what you would at this stage of infancy in some kind of like spiritual discovery environment.
I'm going to say something which might upset a few people.
Okay.
The West has been on a faster spiritual trajectory for the past 1500 years. And the reason why I say this, starting from the classics, from the Greeks, we learned a lot from the Greeks, and the Western civilization departed, and they took the Hermetic Principles as well. And that's why we have all these Renaissance and Enlightenment philosophers who came after that up for 1800 years, based on a very simple principle. And what I call destructive creation. It may not be the traditional sense of what you would call a gurukul in India, where you have a guru and many disciples, but you always have somebody who is actually a heretic, who says, this does not work. So let's break it down and create something new and find out what works. The most obvious of that was in the sciences. And here again, I depart from many people, where some people say the West is technologically more advanced and Asia is spiritually more advanced. That's a very naive and probably the most ignorant thing one can say. Because if everything is mind from the universe, then it's the mind manifesting itself like a dream. When you dream, you might dream of Tommy the dog, and you might dream of Jack the something, etc., of all these characters, and they're all expressing themselves as what humanity is doing. It's both from the same mind. And if you look at the Renaissance philosophers going up right to the Platonic ones, we have been continuously challenging the status quo. Whereas we go down to Asia, we're always trying to preserve the old. What do you think we might be in, say, 500 years from now? I'm one of the few people who says my understanding of consciousness is limited. But in 500 years from now, based on my experiences and the way humanity is evolving, we might have a new experience. My relationship with the universe would change, but I'm prepared to continuously break it down. This idea of destructive creation is a great engine for our own spiritual development. We don't call it spiritual.
Yeah.
And the conflation is, we think to be spiritual, we have to be religious. The West is not religious. It's actually continuously breaking down its assumptions, or what I call destructive creation, to build something new, which is the reason why we have science. We're very irreverent to what we think we know. This is the reason why we had Protestantism. Martin Luther nailed something and says, go, well, to hell with you. I'm going to, and then Protestantism split into something else because I want to interpret it. We have more philosophers from 1100, from, I don't know, you go down right from the Germans to the French and et cetera, et cetera. They all the time, I disagree. I don't agree with this. So they're all creating something else, et cetera, et cetera. I think, in my opinion, that is a great motor for our own conscious expansion. And if spirituality is all about conscious expansion, then they are far more spiritual. And it's great to find somebody there who can integrate your own consciousness, destroying it to create something new. And that is the secret of the virgin birth.
And when you talk like that, David, it does make a lot more sense with regards to the digital world, when it just, something has just clicked. Because then, from what you have just said, there is no one giant leap now to why all of a sudden we have these literal processes that are mechanical processing
Sure.
at the speed of thought, and we're having this destructive creation happening. And now I'm starting to see a synergy there. It doesn't matter which came first, the chicken or the egg, whether we require the speed or whatever. It feels a lot more synergized to what you're saying. So with that, how do you personally perceive this world of digital? Because it's such a great metaphor for consciousness. The digital world is like we've recreated consciousness elsewhere. It's this strange wormhole happening.
Sure.
And so how do you perceive that? What's your view on that?
Artificial intelligence is, I think, what you're referring to.
Yeah.
And I think, artificial intelligence is already here. It's going to grow. It's going to be like a tsunami.
Yeah.
And it's a technology that we have to live with and will live with in the future. So I'm not scared of the technology, and neither should we be. But what I'm concerned about, and this is one of my topics that I'm quite vocal, is many people are actually accepting that AI is sentient. And if I can sort of sum it up, is that I was talking to a few engineers, computer engineers recently, and they were quoting an example of Google, and that it can hold a conversation like a child. And I said, that's complete nonsense. And the reason why it's nonsense is because you guys don't know what's real and what's unreal. And the reason is the only way you and I can talk about something is when we have an experience about it first. I can't talk about consciousness unless I'm conscious and have a conscious experience, or what we term an epistemic awareness of our environment. A computer or your screen on your desktop has no awareness of itself or your environment at all. None.
So
it can't have an experience.
Right. So when they recreate, because you and I have been in similar rooms, I'm sure, similar conversations, when they are, I don't want to get too far into this, but what's your viewpoint on they recreate scenarios? So for the viewers, they will go into whatever kind of computer, whether it's quantum or whatever coding, and they code in a situation, a scenario, and then those avatars or whatever, I'm not a computer programmer, so I don't know, then begin to reinterpret based on their learnings. So whatever was coded then starts to kind of have some kind of experience. You say that that's not an experience. Let's just like
Yeah, I understand the question. You know, what computers do that we can't do is just raw brute number crunching.
Yeah.
And really, what people call artificial intelligence really is just brute uh, statistical number crunching to derive a pattern.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah.
So if I tell a computer, please draw a picture of a dog chasing a cat, the programmer has fed into the computer what a dog looks like. These are the four-legged, whatever pattern, and what a cat looks like.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's got something called language called chase. So it goes that verb. And basically, it just simply iterates statistically dog, chase, cat, and keeps on doing it. We've got another program which does some fantastic paintings called Dell E2 or something. It's incredible. And it draws like Van Gogh or Gauguin or anybody, etc., in whatever way you want to tell it. But all it does, it just regurgitates the inputs that the programmer has over billions of options. So it says statistically, this makes more sense than this, and I'll offer it. And it keeps learning it. So it iterates that this is more accurate than others. Mm. But the programmer has the experience. The program does not.
Yeah. Yeah.
And if you're on a computer and you got a chat box and you're talking to a bank, you get a chat box coming up and said, the computer is now deciding whether you are human. Right. It's just basically using one of the interfaces, the intersections, where the humans have a very conceptual grasp for the environment, which is language, which is still limited by human standards, and uses that to intersect in the human world by the rules of grammar and statistical inferences, and spits out a legible answer. Actually, it spits out more nonsense quite often as well, because if it really was sentient, it would never spit out nonsense.
It goes down to that kind of, if a tree falls in the forest and nobody hears it, did the tree fall in the forest? Well, if two computers are having a conversation and a human isn't there to witness it, are those two computers having a conversation? You know, I guess like at some point, it doesn't, we can go down this road, but actually for me, at some point it reached, so let's say it went all the way to the Matrix. I don't think I actually care. You know, I'm not sure if that's a pressing issue within humanity. I understand that the future is, things will unfold, but I feel that there will be people equipped to deal with that, and that still the discovery journey, as you put it, will be somewhere happening, and that we are, that for me it's just a case of, well, consciousness will still be doing something somewhere. This body is finite. I think to worry about future generations when you have no idea what their propensities will be for anything feels a little bit like, you know, a waste of kind of worry, if that makes
sense. You're rephrasing something which I say is, let's not ponder about the imponderable.
Yeah.
Stick to the now, because really, if people come to me, I'm really responsible of getting them there to get traction what consciousness is. Yeah. But you and I will expand in the future, you know, whatever it is. Even technology will expand in the future. And I can write today and give it to you that even 1 billion years from now, AI will never become conscious, for a simple reason. Even to be conscious, I must have a motivation to have an experience. Computers don't have a motivation to do anything. Even after they process all the data, they can't have insight. They just give you input. We read the data of the computer and we generate that insight.
Back to that insight again. Beautiful. Okay, I think that we are drawing to a close, and with that, I would like to, if I may, call this
Sure.
back to a very humble, everyday experience of you can say no, but what if you could give people a practice to go away with, just something simple, a recommendation, if you will, um, for listeners. Do you have one?
I can share my own experience, and that only my first-hand experience is valid. If I learn to be more aware with all my senses of how that experience is exfoliating within me, it generates insight. That's it. And if I collect these insights, it raises my capacity of intelligence on how I can interact with the world much better. That's it. Consciousness will actually follow through eventually. You just become more conscious because the only time we engage with consciousness is in the here and the now. We can't engage with consciousness in the past, nor in the future, but it's a minor microsecond right now that I'm conscious. That's it. So I'm very attentive for that very, 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 very tiny moment. And with all my senses, I'm alive. I'm not dependent on anything external. So I believe in the inside out approach rather than depending on something outside. That's all the practice I have. So, like I said in the beginning, I really don't have a philosophy, and I hope I don't offer it. I was like that, but I'm just alive, and I'm glad to be alive. And getting there is actually a process.
Well, that's wonderfully put, and I'm sure a lot of things that you've said during this conversation have been food for thought. Okay, David. So, could you elaborate more on how you work with people on this journey of discovery and the Hermetic principles?
This is a question I mean, asked quite often, actually. And so I don't mind actually sharing just a 5-minute overview. And if anybody wants to follow up on that, they can actually get back to me. You see, the Hermetic principles actually is probably the most ancient. It's, precedes everything. It started from Egypt. And it's just not only the 7 laws that they call it. I prefer, instead of using the word laws, I prefer to use the word truisms because they're just like, aphorisms which describe what a human being needs to do. But there's a big difference. And one of the fundamental things that you want to touch upon in the Hermetic truism is that everything is mind. And I think this is also touches upon the questions you raised when I talked about consciousness and how we are part of Paramatma, et cetera, et cetera. So the Hermetic principles were like 3,500 years before BC, et cetera. And it's very well formulated. But that's not all what it is. What it is, it really gives a very practical method for any human being to engage with phenomena and actually with the cosmos. So it's a phenomena kind of a thing. Whereas when you asked a question, how does it compare with Vedanta, Buddhism, etc.? That's what I would call highly philosophical. It's very ontological. I mean, we get into a cloud of what all these things mean, and we get lost in that cloud. So the Hermetic principle is incredibly practical. The second thing which people are aware of, it deals a lot with the occult now. But in the previous, a few thousand years ago, everybody was fascinated with the afterlife because we want to live forever. So the practical application of the Hermetic principles was alchemy. And the old ancient word for Egypt was chem. And that's how we got chemistry and alchemy, which are really related. But when our dear friend Alexander the Great and the Greeks basically invaded Egypt, there was a very syncretic culture. And they realized the Greeks got on very fast, and they realized what the Egyptians were describing were archetypes of the various gods. And they included it in their understanding of depth psychology, of where they departed from the old Hellenistic and the Homerian worship of gods and Zeus, etc., and formed an incredible technology, if you will, of understanding the mind from a philosophical point of view, whereas the Hermetic was basically an application on how you actually dominate your environment, how you turn lead to gold and revive the dead, and reading astrological charts, etc. So it was a very practical way of actually engaging with the universe. They have tremendous amount of mantras as well, which is very similar to what you would have in the East, Far East, like in yoga, Vedanta, and Buddhism. But the comparison of the Hermetic, the old Hermetic, one would say is Tantra. And Tantra is also of actually engaging with the environment and trying to dominate the environment. And you have comparable spells, if you will, or mantra between both. My position is that the Hermetic principle, which is syncretic with the Greek philosophy and with the Arabs, etc., is the original pagan archetype or the Aboriginal archetype of Europe. And it's much more easier for a European to, because of their phenotype, to access some very simple principles of what the Hermetics do and actually understand their relationship with the cosmos and their own reality. So that's my take. But if somebody wants to get into this, there's plenty of stuff out there on what the Hermetic principles are. I'm more interested in how to apply it to an individual. And that's where anybody can, get in touch with me and explore that further.
So it's taking it again from the concepts or the study of Hermetic principles that one might get from reading a book, and then actually working with someone like yourself in order to have that as an active participant in their life experience.
Correct.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure that many people will be interested. I will be one of them. I could feel myself wanting to get a book because
I mean,
okay,
it's I normally don't talk about this because everybody talks what the Hermetic principles are. And in your part of the world, you had great masters of the Hermetic principles. John Dee was one of them.
Right.
And in the 20th century, you had what you would call the most evil man in the world, Aleister Crowley, and a few others as well, of course. And you would understand how the Kabbalah came to be about and the relationship with the Hermetic and the Kabbalah, and how, because the Egyptians had mastered sound, and how sound as a vibration correlates with our internal vibration. My word that I use, how it correlates with your internal archetype, you can actually bring it out. So these are things which I like to keep a secret. It's not something that it's like throwing pearls in front of swine. No, you don't do that. It's quite a dangerous thing, actually.
I do have one question around that then, David. So with the part of it being about vibration, what the Egyptians were interested in, would you say that there is to lift one's vibration, or would you describe it in a different way?
Work with it is what I would say, because your vibration is different from mine as opposed to 7.5 billion people on the planet. Internally, how you relate to the external phenomenon event changes a particular vibration with you, in you, sorry. And most people are unaware of that process. What would happen if we educate them to understand how that vibration changes internally by an external practice? That's magic.
I intellectualize that. A lot of things that you've said during this conversation have been food for thought. I know that I always appreciate hearing what you've got to say. I want to thank you again for all your time. You can actually work with David one to one. He's got his own process that he goes through, whether that would be a relationship or not. You can go to his website and you can go to Spotify. I'll be putting links into as much of his work as I can. And thanks, David. It's been.
You're most welcome, but lovely spending time with you.
Thanks so much, David.
You're most welcome, my dear.